For that and the whole sweater here, I have to go to work after this. So for this next project, we're going to be talking about socialism and how it interacts with different economic states. So if we start by imagining a place where there is no class struggles, there is no political revolutions, and people of all classes voluntarily adopt a plan for their society. This is a view that many had during the early stages of socialism. And what it did, it really gained a lot of momentum, and a lot of people followed it in order to apply their policies into their government. Now, Hungary, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union were amongst a few of the nations that had a type of socialism in their economy. However, the original idea of socialism is now considered utopian socialism. And there is many people that believe that it doesn't really exist, that utopian socialism are no more than philosophical theories for an imaginary society. In other words, they cannot be applied to any physical nation or state. Nonetheless, there were many that followed these ideals, and they tried to run their economies in this form. So, what is the definition of socialism economy? A socialist economy in its present is defined as a system that consists of some form of social ownership and democratic control over the means of production. And that's a direct quote from Business Dictionary, so you know it's right. A socialist economy is a system of productions where goods and services are produced directly for use. So this is in contrast to a capitalist economy where you produce something in order to make a profit for it. So the only reason for production in a socialist economy is depending on the needs for its people. So this means that in a socialist economy, production is always planned, and that is key to what many of these nations adopted here. So ownership varies under different socialist governments. A government can have public ownership, and that is where a state or a public body acts in favor of the people. It can also be direct ownership by worker cooperative. An example would be a firm where every worker has an equal share of the profits and not the profits, but of the say of the company. Finally, ownership may be commonly owned by all of society. Assets are completely open for access to everyone, such like a park or streets and things like that. So initially, the Soviet Union set out to form a fully centrally planned economy. After the victory of the Allies in World War II, the Soviet Union embarked in a mission to spread its political, social, and economic systems all across Eastern Europe. This included Hungary and Yugoslavia. Hungary was obligated, in fact, to pay 300 million to the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia over the course of 6 years. But in 1947, at the start of the Cold War, the efforts between the Soviet Union and the West were beginning to collapse, with communist parties in the rise in Poland, Romania, and Yugoslavia. The United States declared itself a contrast of socialism and dedicated itself to containing the Soviet political spread. This was also the end of Hungary's democratic coalition government. Between 1948 and 1953, the Hungarian economy was modernized to reflect a Soviet model. The government had induced a form of Soviet central planning. By the end of 1949, nearly 99% of the country's workers had all become state employees. But in 1956, Hungary rebelled against the Soviet Union. They elected a new institution and for some type of in-between form of communist rule. Hungary had opted for neutral, multi-party social democracy. So after World War II, the Yugoslavia's most developed and industrial parts were heavily damaged as a result of the war. As a result, it employed a Soviet-style form of central planning, starting with a 5-year plan for its economy. Much of its reconstruction was done by volunteer work, and electricity especially reached across the countryside, which gave rise to the industrial development. But in 1949, Yugoslavia broke out of the Soviet rule. Socialism in the Yugoslavian economies became very different from the economies of the Soviet Union. Overnight, it became treason for communists to display any type of approval of the present Yugoslavian leader and any support of the national roads to socialism. In 1955, a reunion between the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia produced the Belgrade Declaration, which Moscow confirmed that each nation had the right to follow their own road to socialism. The economy was organized as a mixture of planned socialist economy and market socialist economy. Factories were nationalized and workers were given a certain share of the profits. Land was only partially nationalized and redistributed, while also collectivized. By 1950s, a socialist self-managed economy was the main goal of Yugoslavia. This reduced the government's presence and the state's management of enterprises. So socialism has many definitions and it can take many forms. Hungary, Yugoslavia, and the Soviet Union were three very distinct nations with very distinct variants of socialism in their economies. None of them ever had reached or were able to fully develop a utopian socialist economy. But through trial and error, they developed new ways of implementing socialism into their government. They were able to demonstrate to the world the importance of democracy and active civil engagement. And that's it. Thank you for listening. Have a good night.